This is lesson 1-1 for Secondary 1 Math, and we're just going to be reviewing order of operations. No calculators on this lesson. Okay, you should be able to do all of these calculations without using a calculator. And so we're just going to practice how to use order of operations. Okay, so some things that you already know, just going over the warm-up. So 3 and then the parentheses, as you know, mean multiply. So 3 times -2. Remember that a positive times a negative is equal to a negative. A positive times a positive, of course, is equal to a positive. A negative times a negative is equal to a positive. So those are some rules that you've learned before that you need to know. So here I have a positive times a negative, and so my answer will be -6. Okay, -5 and -3. So if I have 5 negatives and 3 negatives, what do I have? I have 8 negatives, so it's -8. It's like if you lose $5 and you lose $3, you have lost $8. Okay, next, number 4. I've got a negative divided by a positive, and so my answer is going to be negative, and 15 divided by 5. Let me just show you one way to simplify division problem. So if you have 15 divided by 5, you can write it like that, and 15 is 5 times 3 over 5, and so if I have 5 divided by 5, that's just 1, and so my answer is -3. Now you might think, well, that's a really long way to do that problem, and that's true, but eventually our fractions that we're trying to simplify, they get a lot more complicated, and so understanding this is really, really helpful in the future for simplifying fractions, which we will do a lot of. Okay, 4 plus -7, so if you have 4, and those are positives, and then you have -7, every time you have a positive and negative, it cancels out, called a zero pair. And so those all just make 0. What do I have left? I have 3 negatives. And so another way you can think about it is if you have $4 and you owe somebody $7, you can pay them the $4, but you still owe them $3. Or if you gain 4 pounds and then you lose 7 pounds, your net total is you've lost 3 pounds. Okay, number 6, I've got -6 minus a -2. So if you remember from previous experience, when you have minus a negative, that's plus a positive. Okay, so we are going to say I'm going to lose 6, so -6, and then it's going to be plus 2. So these are going to cancel out, 0 pairs, and I'm left with -4. Okay, now solving one-step equations, this is the next thing that we're going to talk about, and this is something that you've done in 7th grade and in 8th grade. And so solving number 7, it says -20 equals 5 times x. So I'm asking you, 5 times what number is equal to -20? So it has to be a negative, and 5 times 4 is 20, so it's going to have to be -4. Now you can sit here and kind of guess and strategize like that, but that becomes really inefficient when we have a complicated equation. So you've learned before that if you do the opposite, you can solve equations. So if I say 5 times x, if I divide by 5, do the opposite. So this gives me x, and -20 divided by +5 is -4, and that's my answer. Number 8, I'm trying to solve for y. So it says -7 plus y equals -4. So if I do the opposite, if I add 7, okay, and you've learned how to do this before with these equations, so now it's just reviewing how to work with the numbers. So -4 and +7, so cancel those out to 0 pairs, you're left with +3. Now hopefully you can do that without drawing the diagram or all the plus and minus signs, and you need to be able to do that without a calculator. Okay, number 9, -10 is equal to -2 times w, so we're going to divide, not add. Divide by -2 on both sides. So we're going to have w on the right hand side, and a -10 divided by -2 is a +5. Okay, number 10, v plus 11, so we're going to do the opposite. When you solve equations, and as we'll talk about, you do the opposite. Now watch your signs on this. You've got a -3 and a -11, so you lose 3 and you lose 11. You have lost 14. Number 11, negative, so you got to pay attention to that. And then we've got k divided by 4. So I can multiply by 4. And I actually could make this shorter by multiplying by -4, because then a negative times a negative is a positive, and the 4's cancel out, and I'm just left with k on the left. So if I do it to that side, I have to do it to the other side, so 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. Okay, number 12, n minus 9, so I'm going to add 9 to both sides, so I'm going to have n is equal to, and negative 1, watch your signs, plus 9, so I lose 1 and I get 9, so I have 8 altogether. Now you can think about that in money or pounds or whatever. So if you have 1 that you've lost, but then somebody gives you 9, it's like you end up with 8 because you lost the 1. Okay, so order of operations. In math, we have something called order of operations because we have to have this set of rules so that we can know what order everything goes in. If we didn't have a particular order, then it would be very confusing and we could end up with multiple answers for the same problem, and that just doesn't work when we're trying to go about solving questions or solving equations. So we have this order of operations, and so GEMDAS is how we refer to this as. Now you might know this from previous experience as PEMDAS, but in 7th and 8th and 9th grade we like to talk about GEMDAS more because P is for parentheses, and that's very specific. And so what the G stands for instead of parentheses is it stands for grouping. Okay, so grouping symbols, that's what parentheses are, but there's other grouping symbols that we can have. We can also have brackets. We can even have braces. We could have multiple sets of parentheses. We can even have, and this is something that's kind of new that maybe you didn't think about as a grouping symbol, but you can have a fraction. If you have a fraction like that, really this is grouped. And so we'll talk about that as we solve more problems. But grouping is what comes first in order of operations. So if you see a set of parentheses or brackets or anything like that, you have to do that first. Okay, so that's the first thing. And then E, as you might remember, stands for exponents. So if you have any exponents, you're going to do those next. If you don't do those next, you're going to have wrong answers. MD stands for multiplication and division. So question, does it matter if you do multiplication first or division first? Okay, you might know the answer to this question, but the correct answer for that is you can do the division first or the multiplication first, but you have to go from left to right. So if you see multiplication first on the left, then you would do the multiplication first. But if division was first on the left, you'd have to do that first. Addition and subtraction is the last thing. And again, as far as the left and right goes, you are going to have to do addition and subtraction from left to right. Some people make the mistake of thinking you always do addition first, you always do multiplication first, and then you do the subtraction, then you do the division, and that's not true. It's whatever's on the left working towards the right. So let's practice with some other problems. Okay, so here's the problems, and I'm just going to work through the steps. You can pause the video and see if you can work this out, these first 4 questions. Copy them down, and then you're going to work it out and see if you can get the right answer with no calculator, and I will talk about how to get each of the answers. Okay, so number 1, I see grouping symbols. I see brackets, and I also see parentheses. So what do? I actually am going to work from the inside out. That's how you do it if you have more than one set of grouping. You're going to go from the very inside first. So I'm going to do 1 minus 2 first, and that gives me negative 1. Now I'm not going to do anything else because if you start doing too many steps at once, then you start getting lost. So I don't want to do that. So still inside the parentheses, there's nothing I can do with that negative 1 now. So now I'm going to move out. So I'm going to do this. So within the brackets, I've got 8 times negative 1 plus 2, so the multiplication is going to have to come first. Okay, now I'm ready to work on this. So negative 8 plus 2, that's negative 6. And that's still in brackets, but since the brackets aren't doing anything anymore, I don't need to write them. So negative 6 minus 5, that's the same as negative 6 plus a negative 5, and so that's going to be negative 11. Okay, number 2. Remember what I said about the fraction being a grouping symbol? So I'm going to worry about what's on the top, and then I'll worry about putting it together as a fraction. So on the top, I've got parentheses, so I'm going to do the 7 plus 3 first. So I'm going to have 10. And then I've got exponents, so 10 to the second power, that means 10 times 10, which is 100. Okay, now I've got 100 divided by 2, so now I can put that together. So what's 100 divided by 2? That's equal to 50, and that's my answer. Okay, number 3. There are no grouping symbols. There are no exponents. I do have multiplication division, so I have to go from left to right. So I'm going to do 20 divided by 2 first. Then I'll do 10 times 5. Now, if I would have done that in a different order, if I would have said, oh, I'm going to do the multiplication first, I would do 2 times 5 and 10, so 20 divided by 10, I get a completely different answer. And that's why we have to have order of operations so that we make sure that we're doing the same thing and we all get to the same place. So 50 is the correct answer on that. Anything else is wrong. Okay, on number 4, in the parentheses, I'm going to go from left to right with my addition and subtraction. So 12 minus 2 is 10. So I'm going to have 15 divided by 3, and so that's going to be 5. Okay, number 5. I have this up here again. Don't need that. Number 5, in the parentheses, 1 minus 4, that's negative 3. Now you'll notice I'm just doing one thing at a time. Again, I don't want to do too many things at once because then you start getting things mixed up. So now in the parentheses, the negative 3, there's nothing to do. So now I'm going to go to the exponent. So negative 3 to the second power. That means negative 3 times negative 3. And that's positive 9. I'm not going to do anything else. Okay, now order of operations says division before addition. So I have to do this first. So 9 divided by negative 3 is negative 3. And then plus 1. So my answer will be negative 2. Okay, number 6. Again, the grouping with the parentheses, so I'm going to worry about what's on top and then what's on bottom, and then I'll put them together. So I'm going to do this very slowly, one piece at a time. So 3 minus 5 is negative 2 to the third power, and that's negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. So a negative times negative is positive, times a negative is negative, so negative 8 is my numerator. Now for the denominator, 8 minus 6, that's 2. So I'm going to have that. So negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about, this is a really important concept for understanding how exponents work and how multiplication works. And so there's a question about what is the difference between negative 1 squared with no parentheses versus negative 1 squared with parentheses. And I actually saw a question similar to this on a game show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, one time, and the poor guy missed it. And so who knows, this might be really important someday. Okay, so on the negative 1 squared with no parentheses, what we're going to do is we use our order of operations, and so the order of operations says exponents, and so the 1 is being squared. So that's why I have this 1 times 1 right there. And then you'll notice that there's this negative hanging out there. So it's kind of like a negative 1, that's the negative part. And then the 1 squared is the 1 times 1. And so that comes out to be negative 1. Now, if I have parentheses, then that means everything in the parentheses is squared. So that's negative 1 times negative 1, and that comes out to be positive 1. So there is a difference with parentheses or no parentheses, and you're going to have a lot of opportunities to get the right answer or maybe get the wrong answer there. So negative 1 squared with no parentheses, negative 1 squared with parentheses. Okay, so the next thing we've got some charts, and we're going to look for patterns here. So negative 1 to the first power, this is no parentheses, so that's a negative 1, that's the negative part, and then 1 to the first power, and so that's negative 1. Negative 1 to the second power, that's what we just did. The negative is going to be that, and then 1 to the second power, and so that's going to be negative 1. Negative 1 to the third power, I've got the negative, and then 1 to the third power is 1 times 1 times 1. And so again, that comes out to be negative 1. And so you find out that no matter what, if you've got no parentheses on there, that negative is always going to make the answer be negative 1. And so again, this one will be negative 1, and this one will be negative 1 as well. So negative 1 to the 6th power is negative 1, and then 1 to the 6th power. This is all 1, and then times negative 1 is negative 1. Okay, now in contrast to that, if we look at the with parentheses part, we've got -1 to the first power. That's just -1. To the first power, you just write it once. -1 to the second power is -1 times -1. Negative times negative is positive. That's going to be 1. -1 to the third power. Negative times negative is positive times a negative. That's going to be -1. -1 to the fourth power. So you're going to write this 4 times. And that's going to be a positive times a positive. And so it comes out to be +1. So hopefully you're starting to see that there's a pattern here. And so go ahead and write the next two, -1 to the fifth power. I'm going to write that down here. I don't have as much room. Okay, that's a positive. That's a positive. So I've got positive, positive, and then times a negative. It's going to be -1. And then if I multiplied by another negative and -1 to the sixth power, it's going to come out to be +1. So what's the pattern that you notice? Do you notice that when the exponent is odd, it comes out to be a -1? And do you notice when the exponent is even, it comes out to be a +1? Okay, so the observations that we just made here with the positives and the negatives and the even exponents and the odd exponents, what you need to do is on the lines below in number 9, it says, what are 2 observations that you made in the charts? So I want you to write number 1, and then maybe skip a space, give yourself room, number 2. So what is the first thing that you noticed? If you were telling me that here's what I noticed up above, we just said it, write a sentence that describes that. And then what's a second observation that you made? Write a sentence that explains that. Pause the video and write your sentences. Okay, here's the observations that we just noted. Number 1, with no parentheses, it doesn't matter what exponent you have. The answer is always negative. And the second observation is when you have parentheses, if you have an odd exponent, it gives a negative answer, and even exponents give a positive answer. Okay, so the homework is going to be over order of operations and solving simple 1- and 2-step equations, and you should be ready to do it.